Hello, my name is Todd Miranda, and the purpose of this video is to demonstrate how to host a WPF control in a Win32 application. So let's begin in Microsoft Visual Studio 2005 by creating a new project. And we're just going to create a standard Windows application project, and we're going to put it in the appropriate folder and call it something appropriate. Alright, and we'll do OK. So there's our Windows application that will be used to host our WPF control. And now let's do File, let's do Add New Project, and this time we'll choose a Windows WPF application. Or actually, let's choose a custom control library. Normally you would have a control library that you would have built all your WPF controls in, and then you can just pull that control library in. So we'll do the same thing. Let's create a control library and we'll name it appropriately. Alright. And there's our WPF control library project. Notice how by default we get a user control that's been created for us. So, alright, so let's build our WPF control. And I say let's build a incredibly complex control. We'll start with a rectangle. We'll specify its width to be maybe 100, its height to be about 40. We'll do a radius X of 5, a radius Y of 5, that should be fine. Alright, I like that. And now let's do a rectangle dot fill, and we'll do a linear gradient brush. We'll do a start point of 0, 1 and an end point of 1, 0. Give us a nice diagonal gradient brush. And then we'll have a couple of gradient stops. Maybe we'll just have two gradient stops, one that starts at the beginning. And we'll use a built-in color. We do Azure. And then we'll do another gradient stop. And we'll just go ahead and set it to 1. So we'll just have two gradient stops that just span the entire diagonal of our rectangle. Okay, so there's our rectangle. That looks pretty good. And then we'll also have in here a text block. And text block will say text equals click me. So this might be a custom button that you were creating, and you might have some really fancy rollover effects or some animation type effects that you'd want to do in it. So we'll do text click me. We'll do horizontal alignment equals center and vertical alignment equals center, and that's a cheap way of effectively getting our text block to line up in the center of our rectangle. So we'll click here to refresh, and you see that gives us our text block right in the center of our rectangle, amazingly lined up with our rectangle through very complex means there, just simply by setting the horizontal alignment, vertical alignment to center. So normally you would probably have a little bit more of a complex layout, potentially, if you were doing this in a production environment and you wanted to build some type of control that had a little bit more functionality to it. Alright, now this is good enough for now for our WPF control. We're going to come back and address a few issues with this, though, before it's all over with. So why don't we switch over to our Windows Forms control, and the other thing that we want to do is make sure that we see that we're just going to leave this about the default name of user control 1. Alright, so that's going to be the name of our control. So let's go over to our Windows application. And we're going to go to our code behind for our Windows application. Now, before we're able to do anything here in our Windows application, there's a few libraries or a few references that we have to add to our Windows project. So we're going to do add reference. And since we are hosting a WPF application or a WPF control in our Win32 application, there's really no magic that's going on here. This is a .NET 3.0 control that's going to be running in our CLR 2.0 Win32 application. So since it is a 3.0 control, like I said, there's really no magic that's going to translate this to some kind of a 2.0 control. This is a 3.0 control. There's a few references that we need to add. So let's begin by adding our presentation core and our presentation framework. So this gives us some of our core libraries for controls. The presentation framework gives us some of our other controls, like the grid control that we're using. All right, and then we need to come down here, and we also want to do all the way down here Windows base. All right, and Windows Forms integration. All right, so that should pretty much cover us. Windows base gives us the base Windows module, this base Windows functionality, and Windows Forms integration allows us to obviously do the integration work. So we'll do OK. After we've added those references, we should be good to go. Now we also need to come into our form and do system.windows.forms.integration, and notice you won't get the integration show up here, the integration class show up or namespace show up until you add that integration reference into your project. Alright, so here is our, there's one other reference we need to add. This would be helpful since obviously we're going to refer to our WPF controls. We should have a reference to our controls, and we'll just add a project reference since our control project is in the same solution as our Windows project. Okay, now we should be good. So we want to declare two things. First of all, we want to declare our control that we're going to use, and then we also want to declare the thing in Win32 that's actually going to host or contain our WPF control. So let's start with the element that's going to actually contain our WPF control in our Win32 application. So we'll do actually we need to be inside of our class. That would help, wouldn't it? Okay, so we're going to do private, and we're going to use the element host control. So this is a Win32 control that's capable of hosting a WPF application. So, and we'll call this WPF host. All right. Now, I want to stop here and I want to go back to our WPF control for a moment. And the reason why I want to do that is now that we're at this point, I want to bring something up. Notice that the name of this control is element host, not control host, and not WPF host. This is one of the areas of confusion a lot of times when doing interop between WPF and WinForms. This is an element host control. So that leads you to believe that this will host an element, all right, a WPF element, not a WPF control. I want to make sure that I say that a number of times there. So let's go back to our WPF control and let's see what we need to do to make this a WPF element. Well, all we really need to do is take all of this namespace goodness and class goodness type information, and we need to apply it to the grid element. All right, and we're going to get rid of this user control. So we want the root of our control, quote unquote control, our element, to be an element, and now it is a grid element. Is the root element of our XAML is a grid. All right, it's the grid element. So this is a much better situation for us because now we can host. This is now an element, not a control. Fine line between the two, granted, but we also need to make sure that we come back here to our back end because it no longer inherits from user control. It now inherits from grid. And that's really the only change we need to make. All right, we'll leave the class name user control 1, but now it is a grid element that we've created here, not a user control. Okay, that's very important, and I wanted to wait till we got over here to look at this element host control before we went back and brought that point out, because this really drives it home. It's an element host, not a control host. Okay, terrific. So at this point, now we want to also add our private HDI CS2 dot user control 1. All right, and we'll just call this WPF CTRL. So we have a WPF host and a WPF control. All right, so this is just a reference to our user control that we're going to create an instance of. All right, so now let's go back into our initializer for our form, or our constructor for our form, and we're going to add a few other things here to actually create an instance of the element host control, create an instance of our WPF control, add our WPF control to our element host, and then add our element host to our actual form. Okay, so let's begin by, we're going to say our WPF host equals new element host, and then we're going to say WPF host dot doc equals doc style dot fill. Okay, now what this does here is this effectively allows our host control to fill its parent. So in this case, we're going to add this element host to the actual form itself. But a lot of times what you see done is you'll create a panel in your Windows form, and then you'll add your element host to the panel, and that way you can effectively modify the size of the element host by modifying the size of the panel. In this example, we're just going to go ahead and add the element host directly to the form, and that way you'll see as we resize our form, our element host will actually resize with us, and thusly the WPF control that's inside of it will move along with that. So okay, so we're going to fill the parent. We want the element host control just to fill the parent, and we're going to add that control to it now. So we're going to do this dot controls dot add. So that's the form controls collection. We're going to add to it, and we're going to add the WPF host control to it. Okay, or the host, the host control. Now we're going to create a WPF CTRL instance. All right, equals WPF control. That's how we declared it up above. Equals new. Yes, user control 1. Right. Now we have to manually, since this is an element slash control, all right, we need to call the initialize event. So we'll do the initialize component on that. So that does all of our initialization stuff for us, and then we want to do WPF host dot child. So we're going to set the child of the WPF host, and this is what's going to actually be the WPF control. So we'll do WPF control. All right. So we've created a new element host. We've told it to fill the parent, in this case the form. We've added it to the form. Then we've created a new instance of our WPF control. We've called initialize component on that. And then we set the host controls child property to that new WPF control. Okay, so let's build the solution. All right, build succeeded, and let's run this. So here we are. We've got a Windows application that you see here, and we've got a WPF control hosted inside that Win32 application. So as we resize, you see that our control moves along with us. Now, obviously, we have no interactivity here. So the next thing to address is how do we get information back and forth between WPF and Win32. So let's take a look at how we would do that. Now that we've added the actual form, let's go back to our user control, and we're going to go back to our code behind for our user control, our grid element, and we're going to create some event information here, and then we'll be able to subscribe to that event in our Windows application. So the way you communicate between WPF and Win32 when you're doing interop is through properties and events, just like you communicate between other controls in Win32 and Win32 applications. All right. So the first thing that we want to do is create an event here in our a public event here in our WPF control, and we'll just say public event handler, and we'll just call this on rect click since it is a rectangle. All right. Now let's go over to our actual rectangle, and let's do a mouse left button down, and we're going to say that's going to be mouse down, and just for, I guess, more correctness, we'll say rect mouse down. All right, so let's copy that. We'll go back to our back end. We'll put in our void Control V, object sender, mouse, event args E, and we'll do our typical, like I said, there's not really a whole lot of rocket science to this. It's just making sure that you got your T's crossed and your I's dotted. So we'll say if on rect click is not equal to null. And all of this should be just like event handling is in Win32. So if that's not null, then we want to do on rect click. This is the object that we want to send, and we'll just send a new empty event args, because we don't really have anything to put in there right now. But you could create your own event arguments if you wanted to, your own event arguments class. Use that here. Like I said, really no different here than standard event handling in a Win32 application. All right, so now our event is created in our WPF application. Let's go back to our Win32 application. And here we create a new instance of this control, and we do initialize component. Now let's do WPF control dot on rect click plus equals, and thanks to IntelliSense, we'll just hit tab to generate our event handler, and we'll do tab again to actually generate our method itself. And instead of an exception, we definitely don't want to do that. Let's just do a message box dot show, and we'll just say you clicked a WPF control. Yay. Okay. Alright, so let's build. See if we forgot anything. Well, our build succeeded. Let's go ahead and run it. So there's our form with our control inside of it, and we click and we get our message box. So not only are we hosting a WPF control inside a Win32 application, but now we can respond to events within our WPF control in our Win32 application by simply using standard old events and event handlers and properties to communicate between the two. So you can see that it's very easy to create and use WPF controls in your Win32 applications. This is an ideal way to be able to get into using WPF without a huge application investment in WPF. Maintain most of your work in Win32 and just slowly but surely begin to fold in some WPF work until you're able to make the complete cut over to do a full WPF project.